Hello and welcome again at another development session where we'll be working on Notula. So yesterday where we left off was we implemented all of our domain objects, we've done our testing for it, and now we are still adjusting our codes to actually use them, and we came across this test, and then um, yeah, we have to modify them, but there are some caveats in doing so. There are some easy ways to do it, and some. Well, the thing is, okay, so there are two different ways. Let me show. What you could do with this first step, and that's also why last time, or if you remember from I think it was the first session or second session, not sure. I said here, like, okay, normally I wouldn't do this, but you create user login, and I here pass it on to the user gateway. Normally, you would say like, but you don't know the actual content of this object. Who knows? Maybe like you can't guarantee it's the same object. Well, of course, I can guarantee it's the same object because the object is immutable. It has everything final. It only has getters. You can't change this object. Um, Technically, that would not always be the case, but now, well, it was the case because for strings, strings are also immutable, and here I have even a password. That's also perfectly fine. But imagine you have a private final. Uh, let's say private final list of integer. Let's keep it easy. And these are like sessions or something, or like special tokens. Who cares? Tokens. And so you would think, oh no, that's not allowed to write. Integer. And so any normal person who would look at this might think, oh, this object is immutable. This object is immutable. It's fine, except that I have seen plenty of code where people actually do user login dot get tokens dot add. So tell me again, how is the user login object immutable? The user login object is not immutable because you have a getter on tokens, which gives you an actual representation of this list, which I can then modify. So that's something else that we can discuss about, which is not currently the case because like not really matters because I don't have lists anywhere yet. But so yeah, this is a getter on the list which returns the actual internal list. Some people don't do it, some people don't like it, and they say you should always return like a view of the list or a copy of the list or like an unmodifiable version of that list. Depends what you want. But so this is the whole discussion, debate we're having now about immutability. The user login, I'm perfectly fine with like passing it here because it's immutable. As soon as you do something like this is not immutable anymore. Yes, you can't do directly set tokens. I don't have a user login set tokens. So I can't do this, but I can modify it through a getter, which is really nasty because try figuring out where this actual object is being modified, where are tokens being added. You have no clue. You have no guarantee about it anymore. Maybe the tokens need to be a special number or a special rule need to apply, and you have no control over it anymore. So this is actually like breaking down your domain object as well. It just goes in against everything that you learn in domain object orientation. But anyway, that's not the main point here. Currently, your user login is um, immutable. So the question is, do we want to prepare for a case where it is not? And how come it actually works here? User story. I think there are a couple of cases, or there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The user login is a regular class. It should be mutable. But yeah, as I said, like just adding a list might already change it. The email object, this is just a record object, a value class basically, where you say this is just a wrapper about this thing. It will never ever change. Why is that? Because you only have that one value. There is no reason to ever have to do like this, like get email and then dot value equals or whatever. There would be no reason. If you want to modify the email, then you should just do a set email. Set email, and you say new email of the new value. That's what you should do. You should modify the user login object. You should not modify the email object itself. The email object itself cannot change. So in that case, when you say here exists by email, then technically you could say like, well, okay, so the user login dot get email should be fine. And I agree with that. Kind of. Same as what I've done here. I also use the exact same user login. But just keep in mind that this is not perfectly future proof in a certain way, because you rely on this remaining same object, not just remaining same object, but also keeping the same contents. Because here you don't really know what actually is being passed. And that's why it is nicer to, or that's why in the past I said like, oh, you should take the test user object and just take the email. Which you can still do. I could also say here, no email user get email. And this should pass as well. If I run these tests, they should perfectly pass. Why? Again, because of equality on the object. If this was a regular class and I did not implement the equals, then this would not pass. So this is one way in which I can, for instance, say like, well, this now is independent of which actual object is being passed. It depends more on the content of the object, which in this case we know is just a value. But I'm fine with doing this. I know my objects are immutable. I know that this is fine. I know this is safe. And if I ever change it, then, well, I know I am at risk. What is this organization? Okay, something completely different. Yes. Okay. So you can go on to the last test, and then everything is safe. So here again, we use the login get password, which is an actual password. Of course, our password encoder, which is something we don't really have control over. It's an interface. Should you get the value? This is something. No, this is allowed. Okay. Something that SonarCube will definitely complain about is if you do something like this with an assert that thrown by, for instance, in this case, because then you say like, well, if it does actually throw an exception, you don't know whether it's your method that throws an exception or whether it's your new that throws an exception. So that's why it says like, oh, you should do this outside. But I am actually going to do this outside. So here as well, this is a good question as well. We did a lot of logic on the email and the email value and whatever, whether it's lowercase or not. What you could say at some point, and people might say like, well, shouldn't you verify that in here, or shouldn't you have tests in here that what you pass here to your repository actually is like a lowercase email? And that is a good question, and that's a good thing. Why? Because, well, you pass in an email, you don't know what he's actually going to do. Maybe he will do something as like, well, I will take the validated email dot value and then I say dot uppercase. You don't know. That's true. That's why my users here, they are all lowercase. Alternatively, you could have just done validated email dot value. That is fine by me as well, because then you really verify, or you really restrict your code, or you really express your code in such a way that, like, I really expect the value that you get back from this email object. Fine by me too, perfect, because then you really put the logic where it belongs. Here as well, don't put too much, like, don't add tests for saying like, oh, if I pass in an uppercase email, then this should still be lowercase. That test does not belong here. It is not logic that is done by the gateway. It is logic that is done by the email object. You should only test what is done by your class under test, or your unit under test. Nothing more, nothing less. And so in this case, you don't have much, so you don't have to test much. Simple. Put the test where it belongs. And I understand that in this case, you say, oh, but if you do black box testing, then, well, shouldn't you want to test it? Yes, that's true, if you do black box testing. But if you do black box testing, then you're more talking about integration testing, you're more talking about end-to-end testing or system testing. That's when you do black box testing. You don't know about how everything works inside. Instead, you just throw things at it and you expect certain outcomes. In this case, unit testing, you have white box testing. You know exactly how it works because you're testing the unit. You want to see how it compares. You can have some logic or have some kind of blackness to it. It's like kind of gray box testing where you say like, well, I am not going to test, or like I'm not going to assume that this will always be the case. I'm not going to assume that, for instance, I'm not going to assume that he always does a no check. I'm not going to assume that he always does, for instance, here, I'm not going to assume he always goes to the password encoder. I mean, that's something I verify, something I check because I want it. I'm not going to assume he always just takes this hash code, because that's the actual logic he does. But so you can do certain things where you say like, well, if it's like, if it's larger than 0, whatever, then you can, okay, I'm not going to assume it'll always be larger than 0. I'm also still going to do, because for instance, if you say like, if x, or if x, let's say login dot get email dot value dot length larger than 10, let's say you have this logic. Technically, with actual knowledge of this, what should you test? Well, you should test 11 and you should test 9. True. That's what you should test. The only two cases, because you've done your if, you've done your else. But instead of 9, maybe I would test 10. I would test 10. I would test 11, or maybe 100, whatever. You can test a couple of cases for each one of them. It's not required because, as I said, you have knowledge of it. But you can say like, well, I'm not going to assume certain things. I'm not going to assume that in the future it will still stay this way. But then again, of course, with test-driven development, you would first have to change your test before you actually implement it. So now all of our tests are, wait, normally all of our tests are passing now. I also hope coverage. Can I run this with coverage? Coverage might be problematic with my with Visual Studio Code. I will have to see. Oh, there is still a test failing. Ah, yes. Let's see. That's the things you have. Info get email. That's an actual email object. User get email is not an actual object. What is this? No, can't be static. You want to recreate every case every time. So you might think that actually maybe it would be better to actually have the test user to return an email, a real email object. Could be. And to know that, we can easily check, see where email is being used, and whether, so here for instance, well, this is actual raw value that we need. Here, well, here not. Here, well, here we also convert it to an actual email object. And here it is the raw email. This is the one I just did. Except here, this is the raw. Do I have, I don't use the user for my actual email object, so maybe it is better to actually return an email, which would not be too difficult. I could simply do email password, and here I say new email and new password. This can go away, this can go away. This can become simple email password email. And now, of course, all my tests are failing again. But they should be pretty easy to fix. This I can delete. Ah, yes. See, and that's what I was saying about the whole thing. Toner cube does not like this because you do two method invocations, and so if it throws an exception, you don't really know which one actually caused the failure. Was it the call to user get password, which really shouldn't? So this email. Or was it the actual thing you expect? Yes, this is a good question as well. User DAO test. Um, should I use the test user DAO or not? Oh, the test user one will rely on reflection. Nowhere being used. Where is other user DAO? It should be created another test as well. But there I create mocks because mocks are fine, yes. But where's my find by exist by email? Okay, so the thing is, if I would do a find by email, then of course I would want to create one that actually has the object. Then again, does that really matter? Well, the repository, a user repository shouldn't matter too much because a user repository is a real user repository. So here is where I need to create a new object with find by, then I will really get the object and then I will use my entity manager to verify it if I want to do something else. So I think for my test user, I can just delete this. I'm not going to use this. I'm only going to put domain objects on my test user. Okay, so let's quickly fix our other tests, which should be easy. Hmm. I am thinking now whether it makes sense to add other tests with, like with null values and whatever. Um, but that's not going to do much because this one doesn't allow it. Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. The only thing you could then do is like, okay, you can create user DTOs, which are invalid, but 2BDO, yeah, no, 2BDO will not allow it, of course, because the logic of something else, and that's not what you want to test here. What is this here? Add some tests. Wait, my controller doesn't have tests yet. Okay, we'll have to fix that. Ah, yes, I said I was going to do some SQL injection tests as well to see how I could do that. Yes, that's still on the to-do list. That's for next time. Okay, so all the tests are updated. Everything should work now. And we can run all of them again. Run with coverage. The problem is like coverage uh, doesn't work, at least not in VS Code. If I run it through the command line, then it will work. And I think, did I already have it configured? I think I did already have it configured. Mm. But let's first see whether our tests pass. They all pass. Okay. And then, for instance, you could do Maven test. And you can Chococo report. Or it's the other way around. Report Chococo. Mm. I tend to always mess that up. Let's see whether it has created something. Yes. Okay, and then now we can see that. Okay, command config makes sense. Our domain is fully tested. Our exception is fully tested. More important, user videos are fully tested. DAO is fully tested. The DTO is not fully tested, but that's because I didn't write an explicit test for it because I think that's a bit stupid because the user info DTO doesn't actually do anything. Where even is as my test? The user info DTO doesn't have actually any logic. You can say like, oh, you have to make sure that you can create it. Yes, but this is just meant to return data in a structured way. So technically, the actual reason why this is not being tested is because our user controller is not tested. So, and that's something we should fix. So let's see. What do we have? We have exactly one. Exactly one method um, to be tested. Oh, something I'm also doing differently now is normally in the past I would have said, oh, I'm just going to return user info DTO and not response entity user info DTO because I will do everything with headers. For instance, here in my created, I will do like an add return audit, like status response status, and then here you can also say like code is status dot created, and this also calls it to be a 201 instead of a 200. That's what I did in the past. The problem is then I discovered that especially with um, it was with like an object like a PDF I wanted to return, and I had to put certain headers on it, and the headers you couldn't do through these kind of annotations, which is really annoying because it kind of messes up your whole system. So I had to do response entity on that one because I needed to set certain headers and whatever and stuff, and so yeah, that's rather annoying. And then you have like one where you actually return the response entity, all the other where you return the object, and I find that a bit annoying. So now I've decided to try to use response entity for everything, even though it might not be really required because it's a bit too strict, but hey, who knows? So which test do we have? Well, first of all, we have a test, then we have like an invalid request, so invalid DTOs. Let's say email, password, those are the two things that can go wrong. A server error is something you typically want to check as well. And that's it, I guess. There's nothing more to be done. It's interesting how it does not put this on 2 lines. On other places I've seen it do it maybe not have patience. Okay. So I have to do like what is it again? It is, what can we see? Okay, yes, not can we see dot. No, I'm looking at something wrong here. This must be very old, yes. Let's look at some Spring stuff. Interesting. It actually does say mock MVC. Maybe I'm just perform. Yes, and here you have the request builder, so a post on slash API slash users, which I have very conveniently written here as endpoint. Is that then like this, or something else as well that I've seen people do that I never do is I never create, like I've seen people say like, oh, I'm going to create my create user DTO object, new create user DTO, whatever. Yeah, this is completely wrong, but doesn't make sense. And then here I'm going to say, oh, and I have an object mapper. I'm going to say, oh, yeah, and I'm going to get Jackson do all of this shit for me. Final mapper. Should be var. The other one could be var as well, but who cares? This is only temporary to show you how I don't do things. Write value a string. Oh. So like this, and I say, oh, now I have my string. Now I'm gonna send. That's true. You do have your string. What you also have written is a test that no longer tests anything regarding requests. If you change this object to, like for instance, like now it has email password. If you change it to become email password or path, you change this structure, your requests have changed. Your API has changed. People who have integrated with your application will no longer be able to actually make calls. They will fail because they don't match your API anymore. The thing is, your tests will not test it because your string here will have automatically updated with it as well. Yes, it is low on maintenance for tests, so it's very easy, it's very convenient, you don't have to do much for it because they automatically update as well. But that's not the point of a test. The point of a test is to indicate that something has changed, that something is broken. In this case, you've changed your API, you have broken your API. So don't do this. I never do this. What you can do, if you want to, is, for instance, you can again use the whole concept of the test user and here say like, well, give me a DTO string, give me the actual string value, which then makes it easier to maintain this object. I have done that in the past in case if you have to have lots and lots of tests which exact same string and like, oh yeah, I always have to add it. It's annoying because maintenance and all, you have to update your JSON in like 100 cases because honestly, if you're writing your own thing and nobody else is integrating with your application yet, it's just your front end, then you have freedom over your API. Or if it's a private API nobody else is allowed to use, you have public API, private API. Then of course you can say like, well, I can be lenient with my API, so it doesn't matter. Even then, I don't do this. I always go for the approach of writing it myself. And there are other ways to make sure that you don't that maintenance is easier. So what do we have? We have here email, and that will become something. Currently, Java still doesn't have an easy way to interpolate objects. So I do it like this, and then I say user dot get email dot value, I guess, and user dot get password dot value. So that's one way to get the body, and that's the way I do to get the body. Create method. Then I have to check up which static importer is that. Maybe this one. I really have to configure my static imports in a more decent way. This is the get one. I have the post one. Static imports go on the top. Yes. Okay. Okay. So perform post and expect JSON path. I'm going to do this because I'm also going to do dot and expect status HTTP status dot created. Okay, so this is maybe the only case where I say like, no, okay, it's not like this. Status dot is created. That's how it works. Okay, yes. But this would be a case where I don't mind relying on some static value because it literally is just a value. It's not going to change. Doesn't matter. And expect JSON path. What else do we have? Is that not content first? Content not JSON. Okay, so here you can match with actual JSON, which I have done a lot as well. I'm just thinking which one is better. Because here you have good question. I think in most cases I do want to do a check on the full object. Why is that? Because then if I add something, well, and that's the thing as well. If you add something to your response, you might say like, well, you added something to your response, so you're backwards compatible, so you don't have to add it to your test. Your test will not fail, and whatever. That also means your test will become outdated. You don't check the full content anymore. At some point, you've added something, your test was not updated, you remove it again. Now you've broken your API again, and your test hasn't discovered it because it never was updated. So I prefer to do a full JSON check and expect header. Header. Let's see. Then I probably it's concatenated. Then header. Which header is this? That is the location header. I think it's location. Do I have HTTP headers dot? No. Nope. Let's see what he does. He uses something internally, I guess. Headers. The created takes a. Where does it go to? Not to the actual here. Location. Okay, it goes to some codes we cannot see. I don't think I really have HTTP. A list of HTTP headers. Or maybe it's some. Nope. Sorry, I'm gonna do like this for now. Location. And I expect something, but I will leave it for now. Well, technically it should be endpoint plus slash plus ID, where ID is user.id. Okay, and then you expect not the JSON path, although it exists and it's easy. I expect content.json, which is a response. No, expected response. And then I can here say, oh, final string expected response equals. What do I expect? I expect an object which has ID, percent %s, email, and that's it. I think my user info only has ID and email. Yes. For methods, user.getID, and oh yeah, you might have noticed if you need get email dot value. What is wrong about my JSON? My JSON is actually not valid. Funky formatting. How do I undo a tab? No. How do I undo tab? Okay, just shift. So, what's wrong about my JSON? Well, these are string values. They should have quotes around them. Same here. Email should have quotes around it. So this should fail no matter what. Let's just quickly fix it, and then later on I will show you why exactly I did it. And that is because, and here I have to. It is because I want to reuse this object later on, but I'll show you later on. So here the create user, the actual user service, the only thing that really matters, because as you can see, what does it do? Well, it only just calls the user service with this toBDO of the object, and then it maps it again. So here I have to do an arg-that. Why is that? I have no object to actually match with, because I don't create the object myself. It is the framework that creates the object for me. So we need an arg-that. The arg-that is a bit interesting because it's actually an argument matcher, but I don't use it that way. Most of the time, I actually use it as like a strict enforcing that the object matches a certain value, and if it doesn't, throw an exception. Which is not what you want if you have multiple invocations, but in this case, I like it because it gives you a lot more clarity, a lot more information. For instance, I say assert that DTO dot get email. What is my DTO? I don't think he can already detect which object it should be. Oh, it's not DTO, it's a BDO. So it's a BDO. Let's see. User login is login as an email password. Okay, using it equals not is equal to user dot get email and assert that video dot get password. This is just here that you've actually passed your data correctly. User password. So this is here just to check, okay, indeed, the data has been converted correctly. So if I run this test, hopefully it should work. And I think based on what I've seen, it should work, but there might be some small mistakes somewhere in my test. Okay, we have a 403. A 403 is an unauthorized or a forbidden. Interesting. How is HTTP 403? HTTP 403 forbidden. How can this be forbidden? The thing is, I have already done this. I assume that it doesn't reach here. I assume it is at a higher level. I don't think I can do my exception handler because he only does bad request in internal server. There is something else that's probably throwing an exception. Sometimes it can really be as simple as like, oh, you forgot to say that it was a JSON. Indeed. Why is this forbidden? Doesn't show me much information. Here is more. Here, okay, here there's more information. Debug console. What do we have? It literally does a 403 forbidden. I don't have anything in my config, I think, set up. I just have a password encoder, yeah. Which of course could be the problem that I didn't configure anything, that this is a public and you don't have to be logged in there. But the weird thing is that I'm pretty sure I have, oh, I'm not finding it. I'm pretty sure I have actually been using this. Can I not say post that's JSON? I am gonna do what I normally do, and that is actually do it outside here. Final var builder equals post endpoint dot content. I think I actually did a mistake as well. Dot now the body will actually be used before I to the parameter. Okay, but it's still like that. So then I can say dot what was it? It is consumes produces. Okay, you have content. What else do you have? Content type. That's the one. Media type dot JSON. Okay. Except I don't think except matters too much. I think that's more for content type negotiation. And I think this might be something in my config that is currently blocking it and says like, oh no, you have to log in, you have to authenticate yourself. Yeah, that's what it seems to be. Okay, so that's something we will do next time. And this is where I am going to leave it then. So I will make sure that next time I have all of this configured, I will also make sure that I'm going to set up my IDE a bit better so you can actually use Postman. Containers should be there. Yes, containers is working. That's good. But so I can use Postman. I have my AI assistant, which I want to show off a bit. Why is this failing? That's weird. They should pass. No, it's a user controller test. It makes sense that it fails. That's how we just add it. Tick, 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 tick. That's about it. So SQL injection is something I will also prepare by next time, and then we can quickly go over it, and then we can actually start working on the next thing, which would be logging in. Maybe, yeah, no, I would leave that for next time as well, and then discussing how I went my approach. You might already have noticed that I have gone a bit different with my authentication. Normally, I think people, when they say create an account, they don't do API users, but they say like an auth account or an auth call, and that's something we will discuss a bit more next time as well. See you then. Bye.